Ladies and gentlemen, mediation in a time of fragmentation is the title of the Doha Forum's opening panel. In an era marked by geopolitical tension and polarization and the rapid spread of conflicts across borders, the need for credible and effective mediation has never been more urgent. As traditional channels of dialogue and communication often break down under the weight of mistrust, mediation offers a powerful alternative to rebuild communication, restore a spirit of compromise, and keep the hope of peaceful resolution to some of the world's most intractable disputes alive. It is often up to smaller nations, those without the burden of great power rivalry, to bridge the divides by offering a neutral space for negotiation, investing heavily in diplomacy, and maintaining open lines of communications with everyone. This session looks at how diverse actors, large and small, can help knit back together a world that feels increasingly fragmented. Please join me in welcoming our moderator for this session, CNN's Christiane Amanpour, and our distinguished panelists, His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Thani, Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar, Her Excellency Kaja Kallas, High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission, His Excellency Hakan Fidan, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Türkiye, and last but not least, His Excellency José Manuel Albares, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain. Welcome to you all. Thank you for writing this.
Sound is on? Yeah, okay. Welcome to this first opening panel, and a really good one, because it's all about mediation in this era of fragmentation and obviously of still raging wars. So there's a lot going on, including the latest US national security strategy that's just been released, and we're going to talk about all of this, how it affects all of you and all of this. Can I ask you first, Foreign Minister, since we're here and you're hosting us? You have written that, as a small state, or rather foreign policy right says about you, surrounded by larger powers in a turbulent region, Qatar has long excelled at projecting influence through soft power and cultivating global clout via non-military means. Is that the aim? What's your response to that?
Well, I think
they should be on, yeah.
I think, overall, if you look at the region in general, it's not an easy region. It has like a lot of history that kept this region with very heavy baggage. And what Qatar, the way Qatar is situated as a small nation among bigger nations, we have also to make sure that our region is prosper, our region is stable, and basically, our national security stands on the stability of the region, but as a small nation, we cannot become a superpower by military. But of course, by reaching out through diplomacy, reaching out through investment, through partnerships, that's what creates really the footprint of the state of Qatar. And we believe, as small states, we have a role to play as contributing to the stability of the region, but contributing also to the stability of the world. And what happened with us distinguishing Qatar in mediation, it wasn't like an occasional thing. It was a product of our geopolitical situation. That's why we are always aspiring to settle conflicts through mediations. And we have seen this fragmented world today. It's more and more needed, the role of those small countries.
And just quickly before I move on, there are some in the world who will say, why does Qatar host Hamas, for instance, negotiators, or has supported in terms of, money and things like that in the past? Why does it, host the Taliban? Why does it host, many parties and peoples that some would consider terrorists or bad actors? Can you give the world the rationalization for that part of mediation?
Well, when we are talking about mediation, mediation is a conflict between parties. And if those parties are, normally if you have like state actors, this is like always sounds normal sometime. But in our region, unfortunately, it's between states and non-state actors. And those non-state actors, if we don't keep the open channels with them, then none of those conflicts can be resolved. And this has been demonstrated and proven throughout the last few years. If you look at what we have achieved by ending the longest war in the modern American history between the US and Afghanistan, hosting the office of Taliban was for a single purpose, to facilitate this mediation efforts. And these mediation efforts remained for almost like more than 7 years in order to achieve to that result. On Hamas also, when you look at it, there is, you know, all the outcomes that we have seen throughout 23, 24, and 25 reaching to the peace deal was only happening because of this open communication. Qatar is criticized for, you know, hosting them just, you know, for some very short-term political goals. Unfortunately, those people who are criticizing Qatar, those are the same people who are in need for countries like Qatar to have an open channel with those non-state actors. And at the end of the day, Qatar provide the platform, provide the forum for those parties to talk. It doesn't mean that we are taking one side or the other. Our role is to make sure that the dialogue is ongoing and the dialogue coming out with a positive outcome or constructive outcome that ends the conflict and ends the humanitarian suffering.
Kaja Kallas, High Representative for Foreign Affairs of the EU and Vice President of the EU. You recently wrote a column describing spinning a globe in your office and feeling as though the international order stands on the brink of collapse. But then you write, the reality is that things are not as bad as they seem. How so?
First, I want to start commending Qatar for their mediation efforts. I think, you know, Gaza we talked about, but also Afghanistan, Great Lakes, Sudan. I think in these times where we have more conflicts than ever before, over 60 wars going on in the world, we need mediation on different levels, and Qatar here plays a very, very important role, so thank you for that. If we look at the bigger picture, I think for all of us, what was the introduction of this forum as well, the international law is the one that we should stick to, because this is rules that protect the majority of the countries in the world, which are small countries. The set of rules and principles that we have agreed to, and we need to stick to them as the core principles to defend them in order to prevent wars also in the future. So one is to mediate about the conflicts that are going on, but also the other part is also the prevention of future conflicts.
Obviously, the key ally to, frankly, everybody is the United States of America. Clearly, they've given Qatar recently, because of the attacks by Iran and Israel, a security guarantee. But they've also been the backbone of the transatlantic alliance. So I don't know whether you've read the latest national security strategy that dropped just over the last 24 hours. It definitely didn't treat you as friends. And I just wonder how you think this. Am I reading it wrong? Do you think that it's just trying to tell you to stand on your own 2 feet a bit more? Or are you essentially being censured? Let me just read a little bit. Depicts Europe as facing civilizational erasure at the hands of immigrants and its mainstream leaders, such as yourself, Foreign Minister. It says the United States will cultivate resistance to Europe's mainstream leaders, and asserts that many of their governments, quote, trample on basic principles of democracy to suppress opposition. I was at the Munich Security Conference when I heard Vice President J.D. Vance initiate this kind of strategy by the new US administration. So I'm wondering, you know, all these months later, I'm going to ask you first as High Representative and then you, Foreign Minister, what do you make of this? I mean, Europe's the enemy, you're the enemy.
No, I didn't read it like this. I actually read the European part. I haven't read the rest of it. Of course, there's a lot of criticism, but I think some of it is also true. If you look at Europe, it has been underestimating its own power towards Russia, for example. I mean, we should be more self-confident. That's for sure. And you know, U.S. is still our biggest ally, and there I read it as well that we are still the biggest ally, and it's in the interest of the United States as well that Europe lasts, and that we are really still the ally and working together for these things. I think we haven't always seen eye to eye on different topics, but I think the overall principle is still there. We are the biggest allies, and we should stick together.
Okay. You, Foreign Minister, how do you see it? Civilizational erasure. And they do mention, obviously, immigration as an issue. Your country has had quite a successful recent experiment or strategy with immigration. And actually, your GDP is growing. And I spoke to your own Prime Minister at the UNGA earlier this year, who sort of laid out the strategy of immigration into Spain. So what do you make of being told that your sort of parties, your sort of Europe is facing civilizational erasure if it doesn't change those issues, which are big in Europe too, the immigration issue?
Well,
it should be on.
Thank you very much. The immigration issue is a very big issue for us too, but you cannot avoid certain crises that are taking place around your neighborhood. When a crisis happens, it's your humanitarian duty to shoulder some of the responsibilities that you are facing, actually. That's what is happening with Türkiye. Our objective for the first time is to have an open door policy when this crisis in Syria started. And as a result, we received a lot of Syrian refugees who were fleeing from the war. But it cost us politically back home, but in the long run, we saw that it really has served the humanitarian objectives. But coming back to the original point here, you know, in our region, unfortunately, we are facing a lot of problems. And in Ukraine, in Gaza, and now, thanks God, things are going quite well in Syria. What Mr. Trump and his team is trying to do in our region in terms of mediation and peace activities, I think it is largely overlapping the Turkey's objective and our interest, because right from the beginning, we have asked for ceasefire in Ukraine. We have asked for ceasefire in Gaza. We have, you know, asked an international cooperation in Syria to bring stability, because we took hard lessons from refugee crisis that we face past decade. You know, when we mediate problems in our region, we might end up with less human suffering, including refugee crisis.
So I clearly need a new prescription for my glasses, because Foreign Minister Albares is over there, and you're Foreign Minister Fidan, but you answered that spectacularly. So let me ask you, I'm going to ask you now, do you only have one mic between you?
There is only one, but we are very good friends.
Well, that's
Spanish
good,
and
that's good.
Turkey,
that's
so
a brilliant
we can share it.
ingredient for mediation. So let me ask you then, because mediation is hugely important now in a war that threatens Europe. This new strategy describes Russia as an adversary. Does not describe Russia as an adversary, but it does say that an expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine is a core interest of the United States. The goal of a peace deal would be to re-establish strategic stability with Russia and to enable Ukraine's survival as a viable state. How do you read that, given the current negotiations that are going on to try and end this war?
You know, when you're a European, you are constantly asked for what the President of the United States says or what is the foreign policy of the United States. And I think that what we should really be interested right now in Europe is what we can do in this very challenging moment in world history, in which for some countries, one of them is Russia, war has become a normal tool of foreign policy. It's not the only one. In the Middle East, Israel thinks exactly the same way. We think the opposite. We stick to the UN Charter. We think that war is not a way of settling disputes among people or states, and above all, that a war of aggression cannot have reward. What is at stake right now in Ukraine is, of course, the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukrainian people, which is already huge. We are talking about a democratic state with a democratically elected government. But we are going to design with whatever peace will come one day, and I'm sure that there is a future in peace for the Ukrainian people, we are to design the future security scheme of Europe and also of the world. If a war of aggression has a reward, tomorrow's war, and certainly tomorrow's Europe, is going to be more unstable. Mm-hmm. No one will be out of the risk of waking up and realizing that a strong neighbor wants a part of its sovereignty or of its territorial integrity. So we welcome the efforts of peace of the President of the United States. We think it's good. We have been asking for peace since the very beginning. If it was up to us, the Europeans, or to the Ukrainians, this war would have not started. We want peace. We just want to make sure that it's a just and lasting peace. Just and lasting peace means that there is no reward for the aggression, that there is a sovereign Ukraine that can take its own decision, including which international organization is a part of, and that at the end, that peace is stick to the United Nations Charter.
Can I quickly ask you while I have you here? The US is pretty angry at Spain because you have refused point blank to raise your military spending to 5% of your GDP. I asked your Prime Minister about it, and he had all sorts of reasons. Can you explain where you, as Spain, as a southern European nation, where do you see your biggest threat? And is it not Russia? Why would you not raise your GDP?
We acknowledge that Russia is right now, by far, the largest threat to European security. There is a war of aggression going on European soil. There are other threats that come also from the south, and we have great partners from Mauritania to Jordan. Turkey, it's a key element in NATO and in our southern flank security, and we acknowledge it for that. Spain is a reliable ally in NATO, and it's a vital ally in NATO. We have a historical deployment of soldiers, aeroplanes, ships in the eastern flank. It's more than 2,000 soldiers. The air security of the Baltic states is guaranteed also because of our aeroplanes. We've been in Iceland. We are right now in Latvia, in Lithuania. We have soldiers in Slovakia, in Romania, and we are going to meet, as we have always done, all the commitments that NATO has asked to Spain when it comes to capacities. The only thing is that we can do that with 2.1% of our GDP. We don't need to do it with 5%. So the important is not how much you're spending, is are you giving the capacities that you are being asked for the organization? Yes, we are doing it. And our deployment is at our historical height.
Foreign Minister Al-Thani, part of the national security strategy that just came up, basically a line said that Washington's, and I don't know, I hope I don't get this wrong, but Washington's hectoring of Gulf monarchies has got to stop. How do you, I mean, that must be welcome to your ears, obviously, because it doesn't really talk about human rights and democracy, but it does talk about a lot of what we know that President Trump has always talked about, which is the economy, investment, business, transactions, those kinds of things. You've sat with a lot of US negotiators. You recently, most recently, over the Israel ceasefire in Gaza with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. How does that type of negotiation differ from potentially your interlocutors before?
Well, actually, it's first of all, I think that each conflict has its own nature, and we cannot compare like what's the mediation, for example, between the U.S. and Afghanistan to the mediation between Israel and Hamas, and that happened recently. And basically, what we have seen as a challenge in the recent mediation in Gaza was that there were only the U.S. as part of mediation. They were only talking to one party, which is the Israelis. But in the recent rounds of the negotiations, they started engaging with both parties, which has helped us in making breakthroughs in these negotiations and achieving the ceasefire at that time. The difference, of course, between one administration to another, it's been always there. Like it's not, you cannot see one method that's followed by every administration. But what we have seen throughout the mediation process is an engagement and a willingness to push to the finish line, to get it done, and not to keep it open. Now, we are at a critical moment. It's not yet there. So it's what we have just done is a pause. We cannot consider it yet a ceasefire. A ceasefire cannot be completed unless there is a full withdrawal of the Israeli forces, there is stability back in Gaza, people can go in and out, which is not the case today. Right now, us as Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, together with the United States, we are getting together in order to force the way forward for the next phase. And this next phase is just also temporary from our perspective, because at the end of the day, if we are looking at, if we are just resolving what happened in Gaza, the catastrophe that happened in the last 2 years, it's not enough, because there is a root for this conflict. And this conflict is not only about Gaza, it's about the West Bank, it's about the rights of the Palestinians for their states. So we are hoping that we can work together with the US administration to achieve this vision at the end of the day. It's not easy, it will have a lot of challenges, it will face a lot of attacks, but we will keep pushing in order to find at the end of the day a long-lasting solution that provides justice for both people.
In the ceasefire agreement and in the 20-point plan for Israel-Gaza, there was an indication that there would be an effort to move towards a Palestinian state. For the second time this year, the Israeli Knesset basically, well, they don't want that to happen, and actually Prime Minister Netanyahu and his far-right allies boycotted a vote that was to move the phases along because of the reference in the plan to the two-state solution. When you're talking about mediation, how do you get beyond that kind of ideology? How do you get beyond the hard, liners who don't want even what President Trump has put forward?
Well, actually, here where the enforcement is needed, because one of the lessons learned that we have seen and experienced throughout the last 2 years, that if accountability is absent and enforcement is absent, things can just keep going, and we remain hostage in the hands of the extremists, and that's what we want to avoid. And we have seen that the efforts that all of us, we put together in order to reach to the ceasefire that we have achieved this year, needed for the next phase, which is the stabilization, and then the third phase, which is the Palestinian state. If this extremist agenda will just overshadow all our efforts as an international community, then everyone is recognizing that there is something wrong with the structure that we are working through. And I believe that U.S. role is key in this, because U.S. has the enforcement part of that in order to put this conflict on the right track for resolution.
Foreign Minister Fidan, I want to ask you about this because it's also about a stabilization force. The UN Security Council, I think for the first time in my memory, well, recent memory, with consensus and unanimity, voted for the Trump peace plan. One of the main objectives early on is a stabilization force. What can you tell us about how that's going to get beyond the blocks? I mean, first of all, Hamas is still not demilitarized, and there is a de facto partition inside Gaza, the so-called yellow line. And as we've seen and we've heard from Foreign Minister, there's no movement towards this second phase. I mean, is Turkey willing to put troops on the ground for a stabilization force? Would that be acceptable to any party?
Well, first of all, Turkey is ready and willing to do whatever it takes for us to contribute to the ongoing peace efforts that everybody is collectively contributing. And in terms of ISF, still there is a big discussion taking place, how to form and what are the specific mission statements and what will be the rules of engagements. I think when we define the mission of ISF, we should be realistic and nuanced in expecting certain things from ISF, because there are realities in the field. And I think our first objective in deploying ISF should be is to separate Palestinians from the Israelis on borderline. This should be our main objective. Then we can address the other remaining issues. And whatever ISF is going to do is also be supplemented by other entities like the police force that is going to be vetted and trained. And then also we will have a Palestinian local administration. And then we will have a peace board. Now all these organs supposedly will work together in a synchronized manner. When we have this system more or less in place, I think we can be much more realistic in expecting from ISF. But as I said, there is a big challenge for ISF either, because the formation of the ISF, which countries will be contributing, this is a big question now, and what will be the command structure, what will be the logistics. Thousands of detailed questions are in place, but this is up to our military commanders. But then what will be the first mission? I think once we deploy ISF, the rest will come.
Once you deploy yourself, that's the key. I'll come back to you, Kallas, but I want to ask you as Foreign Minister, I guess one of the questions is, you were one of the first countries, along with Ireland and Norway, to recognize a Palestinian state. And there was a whole load of brouhaha in the world saying that this would just reward terrorism, that it wouldn't advance, the peaceful resolution of all of this. And I wonder whether you think that gave your countries leverage in this process or not, because right now, as you know, there is a massive crackdown by the Israeli forces and settlers backed by the Israeli state against Palestinians in the West Bank, as well as the unresolved issues in Gaza. I mean, people, as you've seen, still living in the rubble, aid still not going in sufficient quantities, and no movement towards the second phase, as far as we can gather. So tell me, and I'm talking about mediation and leverage now, what leverage do you think your declaration, which was then amplified at the UN by many more countries, what did that do?
It's very clear that to work for peace, and in the Middle East, peace means the two-state solution with a real and viable Palestinian state living in good neighborhood with the Israeli state, gives you leverage. Working for peace always gives you leverage. At the time, some people criticized us, saying that we were alone, that it was a void movement. When we see the wave of recognition that came right after, with many members that are permanent members of the Security Council, you realized that we were not alone, we were the first, and we were leading the way towards what we all know, including the Israeli people, that is the real path for security and for peace for both Palestinians and Israelis. We did the recognition because of justice, because it's justice for the Palestinian people. I don't see why in the world we would assume that the Palestinian people is the only people in the world that are eternally condemned to be a people of refugees. We did it because of peace, because we will never accept that the only way to relate between Palestinians and Israelis or among people in the Middle East is through violence. Why we Europeans could create the European Union and instead of making war with your neighbor, and it was the border was almost a curse for us in Europe, and we turned it into cooperation. Why it couldn't be the same thing in the Middle East? We are also in favor of normalization of relation of the Arab countries with Israel. And we did it also because of pure humanity. When you see 70,000 Palestinians being killed in front of your eyes, in front of your TV screen, children's babies, and when you believe in the United Nations Charter, in the principles and values that founded the European Union, you cannot be moved. You have to do something. On Wednesday in Madrid, we are going to receive Mahmoud Abbas, and we are going to convey the same message. It's time to work to put in place a real Palestinian state. And that means the West Bank and Gaza under one single Palestinian authority. We have to stop the violence of those settlers that is really out of way. And we have to stop all those illegal settlements that are spreading. We have to go for reconstruction in Gaza. And the day we will have one single Palestinian authority that will control the West Bank and Gaza connected by a corridor with an exit to the sea and its capital in East Jerusalem, living in good neighborhood with Israel, I think that day we will have achieved what Europe stands for, and it's peace and the respect of international law and international humanitarian law.
Kaja, Kallas, can I ask you, we're going back to the European war right now, or the war on the European continent. The 28-point plan that President Trump put forth a couple of weekends ago was vigorously amended or discussed by Europe and Ukraine. On the other hand, would you agree that Europe has not put a peace plan forward for Ukraine, that this process by the United States is the first actual time, and you've just said that you've been calling for peace and this and that. That's one question, but it's related to leverage. Military commanders tell me that in times of war, either superior military might will end a war, which it hasn't here, or actually, you know, even between Israel and Palestine, or the parties have to come to some kind of, be forced to the table. There has to be enough pain on whichever one, both, to come to the table. Give me your responses.
First, I actually wanted to build on something that His Excellency said about accountability, justice, and the peace lasting. Because one is to achieve a peace deal, and the other thing is that this peace is sustainable, which requires the whole of society approach, really, that, you know, people also accept this. I mean, wars always bring human suffering, and how can we go from this place that what happened would never happen again, and that is bringing a sustainable peace. Now, coming to your question, in Ukraine war, there are no both parties because there is one aggressor and one victim. And that's why, you know, if we want to have a sustainable peace, a long-lasting peace, We should make sure that the concessions are on the aggressor's side, that the aggression does not pay off, it's not rewarded. If we look at the last 100 years, Russia has attacked 19 countries, some as many as 3 or 4 times. None of these countries has ever attacked Russia. So putting limitations and stress on Ukraine actually does not bring us long-lasting peace. Okay, we give security guarantees to Ukraine, it will end there, but it will start somewhere else, because the problem is the Russian military. Their army is extremely large, their military budget is enormous, and they will want to use it again. If not on Ukraine, then somewhere else. So focusing on really, putting the pressure on the aggressor, like José Manuel said, if aggression is rewarded, we will see it happen again. And not only in Ukraine or Gaza, but all around the world, because aggression really pays off. That's why we have so many wars nowadays going on, that the international law is really under heavy fire.
Okay, but the question really is, what is the leverage that you have? Because if the US is pulling back, which it is, in terms of making you step up and fill that gap militarily,
yes,
clearly Putin doesn't feel any leverage right now.
We have leverage, and that is economic leverage. I mean, wars also end when the aggressor runs out of money to fund this war. And that's why, yes, we see the economy is not doing well. I mean, if you look at the indicators like the interest rate of the central bank, you see that their national fund is almost completely depleted. They don't have the same revenues from oil and gas due to the sanctions, and also, the sanctions on shadow fleet are hitting them hard. Now we have the discussions of using the Russian frozen assets for the reparation loan.
Where's that going to end? Because Belgium says no.
Well, we are 27 democracies. It always takes time to get to results, but the discussions are ongoing. The proposal is now on the table. Why is it so important? To really show that it doesn't pay off. And there are examples from the history, from this part of the world. I mean, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, it was exactly the same case. I mean, if you look at the speeches...
there was a military confrontation. I covered it. America got 500,000
the difference was it wasn't the UN Security Council member who was doing the aggression, and that's why the international response was very clear. But the case is exactly the same, and there we actually defended the international law, all of us together. So my point being that wars end when aggressors run out of money. By the way, Russia ended the war in Afghanistan when they ran out of money to finance this war. So they want us to believe that they're doing fine, nothing to see here, we can outlast you. It's not really true. If you and by the way, in that national security paper that you were talking about, there is that Americans are saying that Europe has a huge leverage, regarding Russia. So we shouldn't also underestimate our own power and overestimate Russia's strength.
Except often from America we hear that Ukraine has no cards, that Russia thinks it's going to win. I mean, what does that do in terms of building leverage for the person you said, or the state you say needs to be defended, which is the victim?
Well, first of all, we should understand, and really, I mean, we have so many examples from the Russian negotiation tactic. I mean, this is the way they operate always. Present demands, like totally absurd demands. Like right now, they are demanding territories that they haven't been able to conquer militarily in 11 years. If you think back to 2014. So they're demanding this. Then the second is like present threats, ultimatums, which they are doing as well. And then, third level is that there will always be people in the West who will offer you something that you didn't have before. So you walk away with more than you had. We have seen this many, many times, and always it brings more war. So right now we should not walk into those traps, and we should concentrate on what we are doing, helping Ukraine to defend itself, pressuring Russia with the sanctions so that they would actually go from pretending to negotiate to the point where they need to negotiate.
Foreign Minister Fidan, can I ask you, I think it was 10 years ago, Turkey shot down an incursion by a Russian fighter jet. And it was fine. The rules of the world were established. You said don't come into our airspace. They did. You shot them down. Boom, that was the end of that. So I wonder, I know you're not Europe, maybe one day, but Russia upped the ante this week saying it's ready to wage war on Europe right now if Europe goes to war. How do you see that, and what do you think Europe should be doing to force Putin to a reasonable negotiating position?
I think up until now, as Kaja has just said, I think Europe is trying to do their best to counter this aggression. On the other hand, they have started partnering with the United States. But now, in the absence of the United States, Europe is in need of finding more creative solutions to become more resilient. But I think the only viable way to go and finish this war is to engage faithfully and forcefully in peace talks. There is a good mediation is taking place at the moment. I know that Europe has every reason not to trust Russia, and also vice versa. If you listen to Russians, they have every reason not to trust anybody else, but they have their own perspectives. First of all, just the example that you cited, Christian, when we shut down the Russian airplane, later on, we needed to talk to Russians because we had different positions, opposing positions in Syria, no matter how much we were opposing each other in the field, but we knew that we needed to talk. To be able to talk, you need to have a platform, a medium to engage. And this has been what I've been advising for my Ukrainian and European friends right from the beginning, and beforehand the American friends during the Biden administration. Fighting an adversary doesn't mean that you cannot talk. You cannot talk. I think there is a huge opportunity in engaging talks, and it may not immediately stop the war. It may not immediately stop the suffrage, but certainly it helps, and it creates extra opportunities and chances for the warring parties and interested parties around the case. So that's why we really emphasize the importance of the talks right from the beginning. But I also agree with Kaja and José Manuel that they have every reason to be successful, and so I just hope that the American mediation that is taking place now can succeed, and we are trying to do our best to help them.
Okay. And final word to you, Foreign Minister. Again, this is about mediation in a fragmented world and leverage that allows mediation to actually have some success. The Trump diplomacy is somewhat different than previous diplomacy, using a lot of business and investment and that kind of structure around it. So this is what the Wall Street Journal says. The picture that emerges is a remarkable story of business leaders working outside the traditional lines of diplomacy to cement a peace agreement with business deals. Now, whether that's Russia-Ukraine or whether it's Israel-Palestine, I want to know what you think, sitting in this part of the world, as business being the underlying motivator for A, negotiations, and B, sweeteners for the parties.
Well, I think, whenever we embark in any mediation efforts, we need to look at the destination that we are going to. In order to create a condition for a peace and coexistence, you need to show them the prosperity, you need to show them what can be built if you are building on your common interest. And trying to widen the foundation of the common interest between the parties is a key thing a key factor in order to achieve a successful mediation. Using the economic instruments in diplomacy is a very important thing, because basically when you have a lot at stake that you will lose if you will embark into any conflict with your neighbor or from within, then you will think about it twice. And I think that this is a very intelligent way in order to structure mediation around interests, around common interests between the countries, between the parties of the conflicts, and supporting it by mediators, by other international actors. I believe this is our modern world today. Every country in need for economic support, economic prosperity, and I believe putting our efforts together in order to achieve peace from that angle is a very important instrument.
One last question to the European at the table, lots of, but just usually it's values, it's international law. What do you think of this new kind of diplomacy and an attempt to get, knock heads together and get the sides to understand that they need to stop war?
We are in a crucial moment right now in what we call in diplomacy world order. There is a change. So anyone or anything that can help to bring peace, mediation for instance, what Qatar does, it's amazing and we really commend it. It will always be welcome. We need traditional diplomacy, but if there are other ways that can bring people together, help each other to understand better, welcome. Okay. But we must make sure that we are always talking about peace that are lasting, that are just, that are for the good cause.
Okay. 30 seconds.
Yes, I would still stress one thing, which is the long-term peace and the whole of society approach, because knocking heads together, getting the peace deals.
That's my word.
Yes, yeah. But I'm taking from that means that you can get deals, but it has to be also accepted by the society. I mean, we saw in Colombia there was a peace deal, but people rejected it. And by the way, there was recent study about the peace, different peace talks. If women around the table, then the peace agreements actually last 35% more than those where women are not at the table.
Clearly, I'm going to clap to that. So it's a great way to end. Foreign ministers, High Representative, thank you so much for this discussion. Thank you. Thank you. It's really nice to see you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you. Thank you. What do you think is going to happen in Syria?